Hi, my name is ALBERTO RETANA. I'm the president and CEO of Community Coalition, and we're here at LA Trade Tech for our 4th annual People Power Convention. It's Community Coalition's annual People's Conference, where we bring residents, African Americans, Latinos, primarily from South LA, and others from around the city are welcome to learn about the struggles and the challenges, and more importantly, the dreams, aspirations, and strategies we're putting in place to make South LA a prosperous place for everyone who lives there. The People Power Convention is not like any corporate conference. If anything, it's the unconference, where we don't put power in the panels, we put power in the people that participate. So we have 4 different tracks. We have a track around justice, a track around art and activism, a track around educational justice, and a track around educational and civic engagement. These 4 tracks are about putting people that are here, treating them as actors and protagonists in social justice. So we're not here to learn, we're not here to educate them, they're here to educate us, we're here to learn from each other, we're here to get active, and at the end of the day, between this year and next year's convention, we hope people can report back on the activism that they were involved in, on the voting that they participated in, on the pressure that they put on elected officials, and most importantly, the material conditions they were able to improve for Black and brown folks living in their neighborhood.
So Eliana, in your work, you look at some of these issues around trauma, and part of what we know is that academics cannot improve unless we respond to some of the mental health needs of our young people. Los Angeles Unified recently screened 2,500 students last year and found that 40% of them reported feeling not safe, that 26% of them reported high levels of trauma. And a report that came out 2 years ago found that 98% of 6th graders had experienced a traumatic event within the past year. 98%.
You know, this afternoon we have a very, very special conversation happening between Congressmember Karen Bass and Van Jones. And the conversation is around addiction. You know, Community Coalition was formed close to 30 years ago in response to the crack epidemic to create a people's response, much like the response is happening today, 30 years later, around the opioid crisis.
But when I come to South Los Angeles, I feel like I'm walking on holy ground. This was a world historic catastrophe that happened here. Families were ruined, communities were torn apart, and people who needed help were hurt. And yet people stood up, and people fought back, and people found a way and made a way. And now there's wisdom that's really needed in the rest of the country.
I'm Van Jones. I'm the CEO of something called the Reform Alliance. We work on criminal justice reform. Long-time participant in justice fights for California. One of the big things we're trying to deal with, obviously, is this big addiction crisis that's been going on across the country for generations. It's showing up now as the opioid crisis, hitting mainly white and rural areas, but we've had a crack and heroin and opioid crisis going on in the Black community for 2 generations now. So the idea for me being here at the People Powered Convention is to talk about how we can have real solutions that take everything that we did wrong over the past couple of generations when it came to overreacting to crack cocaine, over-incarceration, over-arrest, over-supervision, overly draconian solutions. Let's evolve those solutions into something that focuses less on public safety, so-called, but more on public health. We're starting to see that make sense in the opioid crisis. It really should make sense across the board when we're talking about this addiction epidemic across the country, and the pain and suffering in the Black community and brown communities for bad policy we should immediately address and replace with better policy. We need more money, more recovery centers, more help, less harm for communities that are suffering.
After the last election, a number of my colleagues, my white Democratic colleagues, came up to the microphones after the election was lost, and they talked about the devastation in their community, the loss of industry, the loss of jobs, how people were depressed and they were using drugs, and it was devastating. And I was like, hello, got a little experience with that. But even had to fight about that, though, because people look at the opioid crisis as that's different. That's different. I had a reason to use that Oxycontin. You know what I mean? And then I went to heroin. So my addiction was a little more legitimate than what was happening before.
Hi, I'm Congresswoman Karen Bass, representing this district right here at Trade Tech, and I am here for the Power Fest, and this is wonderful. The Community Coalition is going to be 30 years old next year, so if I think about where the community was 30 years ago to where the community is today, we're in much, much better shape, but we still have things that we have to deal with. So while the nation is concerned about the opioid addiction and the impact that it's having on a lot of white communities, we need to keep the drug issue top of mind in our communities as well, because it continues to have a devastating impact. So that's what we're doing here today. We're talking about the problem, but we're coming up with solutions, and I'm very glad to be here with Community Coalition.